May I now give the floor to Ms. Bience Gawanas.
Mr. President, distinguished members of the Council, I congratulate South Africa for its presidency this month and thank you for the opportunity to brief you on this important agenda item and theme on peace and security in Africa, mobilizing the youth towards silencing the guns in 2020. From the onset, I would like to emphasize that the core aspects of this theme, mobilizing youth and silencing the guns in Africa, is not a choice, but an absolute necessity. As a matter of fact, it's a crucial pathway for the realization of our shared goal of leaving no one behind and achieving a conflict-free Africa we want. Africa is one of the world's youngest continents. As is well noted in the concept note for this debate, over nearly 20% of Africa's 1.2 billion population, approximately 220 million, are aged between 15 to 24. This number is projected to rise to about 350 million in the next decade. Therefore, it is imperative that Africa harnesses this demographic dividend in silencing the guns, in combating the threats to peace and security, including radicalization, violent extremism, terrorism, sexual violence, xenophobia, cyber insecurity, organized crimes, forced migration, proliferation of small arms and light weapons, and politically aligned militias, and in addressing the root causes, including exclusion, inequalities, high unemployment, poverty, and climate change. Mr. President, as the main findings of the 2018 study on the missing piece, independent progress study on youth peace and security highlighted, too often the perspectives on youth are distorted by contagious stereotypes that associate young people with violence and conflict. These myths have triggered a policy panic, producing an unnuanced policy responses that involve hard-fisted security approaches which are counterproductive and not cost-effective. However, it must always be recognized that the large majority of youth in Africa are in reality peaceful and enterprising. They are agents and partners of peace, the connective tissue, and have a critical contribution to make at national, regional, and global levels, breaching the silos of development, human rights, humanitarian, and peace and security. If the right investments in youth are made and their social, political, and economic engagement recognized and nurtured, societies may reap a peace dividend. For this reason, the Global 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development and the Security Council Resolution 2250 collectively recognize the important and positive role that youth play in maintaining and promoting international peace and security, as well as advancing sustainable development. Similarly, at the continental level, Africa's Agenda 2063 and the African Youth Charter recognize the creativity, energy, and innovation of youth as a driving force for the continent's political, social, cultural, and economic transformation. The onus is for governments and their development partners, including the private sector, civil society, and the United Nations, to work together with youth to implement these normative instruments in a manner that is truly meaningful and inclusive of Africa's young women and men at all stages of conflict prevention, resolution, peace building, post-conflict recovery, and sustainable development. For Africa's youth, the time for effective and meaningful implementation of these instruments is now. As we have seen across Africa, youth are demanding urgent action and are making their voices heard. From Algeria, Burkina Faso, Sudan, Tunisia, and Zimbabwe, Young people are at the center of the pro-democracy movements, effectively mobilizing, organizing, leading, and clamoring for inclusive and accountable governance, youth participation, and economic opportunities for all. For instance, in South Sudan, youth representatives in the high-level revitalization forum secured a place for young people in the country's broader governance structures through affirmative quota systems. On their part, African countries have taken important steps aimed at removing structural barriers that prevent or limit the inclusion and active engagement of young people in peace and security, political governance, and socio-economic development. Several African countries have implemented the African Youth Charter. A few African countries have established laws and initiated campaigns to promote youth political participation. Additionally, in several African countries, peace education is incorporated in schools' curriculum efforts. At the regional and sub-regional levels, the African Union, the regional economic communities, and several regional bodies and non-governmental organizations are engaging youth in initiatives to silence the guns. For instance, in the context of implementation of the African Union Master Roadmap of practical steps to silence the guns in Africa by 2020, the African Union have taken steps to address the bulging youth unemployment crisis through the launch of its 1 million jobs by 2021 campaign. This is consistent with the Africa Plan of Action for Youth Empowerment. The African Union is also encouraging the creation of platforms for youth engagement in silencing the guns, including through social media. Mr. President, the United Nations system is working in strong partnership with African member states, the African Union, the regional economic communities, other regional and sub-regional bodies, as well as with the African private sector and civil society, to support meaningful youth inclusion and participation in conflict prevention and peace-building processes. At the sub-regional level, INOWA supported ECOWAS in organizing the first annual Regional Youth Forum on Peace and Security in December 2018 in Ouagadougou. However, more still needs to be done to bridge the gap between policies and plans and implementation to create impact. At national levels, member states must invest in protecting and promoting the right of children and youth. The commemoration of both the 30th anniversary of the Convention of the Rights of the Child and the Africa Youth Day this November provides member states an opportunity to recommit upholding the rights of youth to meaningful participation in peace and security processes. Youth ministries and national councils should also be leveraged to promote peace education and culture of peace programs in schools. This can also be done at community levels by encouraging youth as well as parents, teachers, non-profit organizations, religious and community leaders to support the establishment of youth groups that facilitate dialogue and offer youth a chance to formulate and voice their opinions. Similarly, the private sector, especially information and communication technology companies operating at country level, could be engaged to provide free SMS-based platforms through which youth can express their views on events in their localities and contribute to conflict prevention and peace building. At regional and sub-regional levels, the African Union and regional economic communities should meaningfully promote the inclusion and participation of youth in their peace and security programs and processes. Building on this, the African Union's youth envoy, who's sitting right across me there, should proactively engage member states and the regional economic communities to better understand what is being done, especially in conflict-affected areas, to advance the youth peace and security agenda. I was really privileged not long ago to engage in an international dialogue that with youth, and I think that is what we should continue to promote. We need to listen and to hear what the youth are saying. The United Nations system through the country team should ensure and promote synergies between national plans on the implementation of the SDGs and the Security Council resolutions 2250 and 1325. To consolidate the advancement of the youth, peace and security agenda, The Security Council may consider creating an informal experts group on youth, peace and security that is comprised of diverse group of young people and youth organizations. This aligns with a recommendation contained in the study report on the Missing Peace Independent Progress Study on Youth, Peace and Security. On the side of OSA, the Office of the Special Advisor on Africa, every May we are organizing the African Dialogue Series, and next year we will be organizing the African Dialogue Series on silencing the guns, and we hope that as many of the member states will participate. Lastly, as we fast approach the next African Union Summit and the launch of the Continental Campaign on Silencing the Guns in February 2020, the United Nations and international community should consistently and systematically engage African youth in all efforts that contribute to the Silencing the Guns initiative. In this respect, the 3 clusters of the United Nations Task Force on Support for Silencing the Guns in Africa by 2020 on socio-economic nexus between peace and development, and peace, security, humanitarian and governance, and awareness and communication should devise specific modalities for including and engaging African youth. African youth are telling us that it is good for us to fight for stability, but what they want to see and what we need to give them is hope and prosperity. Thank you, Mr. President.
I thank Ms. Gawanas for her briefing.